Welcome to the Bearhug Experience, where we cozy up to the fire in our digital den and immerse ourselves in the inspiration born from exploring the hidden narratives and inevitable plot twists that shape every compelling startup journey. Join us as we showcase inspirational guests from bold investors with the Midas touch to pioneering entrepreneurs at the helm of today's most thrilling startups. We'll also hear from courageous go-to-market leaders navigating the frontier of emerging tech and the unsung heroes bringing all the people and parts together to form unstoppable dream teams. Here's your host, Kraig Ward, founder and managing director of Bearhug Recruiting. Get ready for an insightful journey.
The following is a conversation with David Connors, co-founder and CEO of The Swarm. David is a 3-time startup founder, including an exit to Sequoia Capital, who acquired his outbound recruiting automation startup, Automately. After the acquisition, David joined the Sequoia team as their director of recruiting operations, where he went on to build custom tools for Sequoia's recruiters, investors, and founders. David has since gone on to co-found The Swarm, with backing by the founders of Superhuman, Thumbtack, Lookout, Bearhug Recruiting, and other successful operators, in addition to prominent VCs like 500 Global, Contrary Capital, and Sequoia Capital. The Swarm is the first go-to-network platform giving companies and investors the keys to their networks and the relationship data they need to accelerate sales, recruiting, and fundraising. Welcome to the Bearhug Experience. And now, dear friends, fellow entrepreneurs, investors, and startup enthusiasts, here is David Connors. All right. David Connors, how are you?
Hey, Kraig. Good, man.
I really appreciate you coming on the show and doing this. I'm curious, how are you feeling this morning?
Feeling pumped, feeling energized. Been looking forward to this conversation and keen to dive in.
We've known each other many, many years. I don't know how many years it has been, but I definitely know when I started getting into tech, I met you really early. And we'll get into some of the story as well, but it's been so fun to be a part of your life over all these years and to be here today doing this. I mean, it couldn't be more exciting for me to have you as a guest.
Yeah, I think we're probably closing in on a decade, I'd say.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've both had kids in that time frame, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot that's happened with business and everything else. So why don't we get into it, starting with the mission that you're on today. I understand that you're disrupting the world I'm in, which I'm excited about. And I think we're going to have a lot to talk about because I know a lot about sort of this world of tech and this particular sort of service area that you're leveraging a new technology to really create some positive change. So why don't we talk to our listeners about what you're up to these days and why it matters?
Sure. Well, I think at a high level, trying to change how companies are built is the strap line, I suppose. And I think the shifts in the market, of the last 10 to 15 years, how companies have been built in that time and the playbook that's been run, and now entering into this kind of new uncharted territory where the playbook is getting written in real time. And we have some interesting ideas about what we think should be the new playbook. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that are still yet to be written, right? But we definitely, enjoying kind of helping to architect and design the blueprints of how companies are built for the next decade and more.
And so when you talk about companies being built, you're talking about it from the way that what gets done?
So the way that, in the first place, the team is formed, how employees join the company, how the recruiting engine works to pull people in, but then also what those people are doing across the different functions of how the product's built, how the product's sold, marketed, and then how capital flows into the company, and really shifting from this old paradigm of, call it, growth at all costs, which allowed companies to scale up the number of humans at a company. And basically, you could raise more money and add more humans and add more uh, sort of bodies into the machine. Versus now, we're in this era of, call it, efficient growth,
Mhm.
where money has become more expensive. So that old model doesn't really work anymore. So now you have to figure out, how do we continue to scale up, but in a much more efficient way without spending as much money. And that means without necessarily adding as many people, and really figuring out how you can build this company in a much more efficient way. So from all the way from how people finding out about and joining the company, to how the engine inside is running, to how you then distribute, and sell the product, and make more money.
Yeah, and so the technology that you have set out to build, it's been so fun to watch you ideate and then found the company and then hire the people and then raise the money and then put the product together. And we're at a really cool stage together. I'm an investor in the company and I'm really proud of that. I'm a shareholder in several other startups, but this one in particular is so near and dear to my heart, with our friendship and so forth. So you're calling it the Swarm, right? Do you want to talk just for a second about the concept of that name and how that sort of factors into how the ethos of the company of, building companies gets put together?
Yeah, we so first sort of landed on that name. I had some interesting kind of pushback from my family and friends, where there has this sort of negative, kind of pejorative connotation with the swarm. Right? It's like this swarm of
Yeah.
bees that's going to come and attack.
Yeah.
But I kind of liked it. It sort of, to me, was this sense of this swarm of people and ideas and capital descending onto an early stage company and giving it this this incredible boost and lift to tap into the wider swarm that existed around it. And then this concept of, that can be not just one swarm but multiple swarms, and that all kind of can form together into this meta swarm. And the way that sort of works for the technology that we built is really the network, and the network that sits around a company, and not just the employees of a company and the investors, but also the advisors of the company, the customers, obviously, as well as the partners, the
Hmm.
vendors, the suppliers. So there's all of these companies and people that are connected to the company in some way. And historically, there's just been no way to visualize that, just to map that, to reveal those relationships that the firm has. And everyone uh, has sort of appreciated the value of tapping into this extended network, but it had been very manual and ad hoc and just not very systematic. So that's what we're trying to build, which is a way to leverage your network and get the keys to the relationship data that your firm already has. It's just a matter of operationalizing all those relationships for how you build a company in this new era. Um, yeah.
Well, and one of the things in building a startup that the people that are in that world know is there's such a key point made when you think about product market fit, but then there's also like founder product fit. And so I know your history. And so this to me seems like just the next natural evolution of all of the accumulated experience and knowledge that you've gained to see the problem and see the opportunity and be able to see this more holistic approach to solving this thing that you see to work towards efficiency. I really can't wait to get into the backstory for how this all came to be, because I think it adds so much great context. But before we do that, let's talk briefly about the specific things you've learned about yourself that make you suited from characteristics of your personality, kind of your innate strengths. What have you learned about your super passion or superpowers that makes you uniquely suited to take this on and build this thing?
So I think one of my quotes that I heard somewhere, or I don't know where to attribute it, but it's when in doubt, zoom out.
Mm.
And I really like that, the concept of sort of zooming out to see the whole, the macro, and then kind of zooming in to get into the minutiae. And something I've always loved doing is figuring out, can we build a system or a machine around this problem, around this space, and trying to think of things. I think the term thinking from first principles is probably a bit overused, but I like to just think about it like from just a zoomed out, perspective, trying to think about how this total problem and this total space, with all the different moving parts, can operate, and is there a machine or a system that we can build to improve it. So that's what I've sort of always been drawn towards. Some other people are fantastic at diving into the details, or being very creative in other ways. I think I'd say my superpower, almost my form of creative expression in a way, is sort of designing and building these systems, and these machines. And that's where my mind naturally kind of goes, when it's a rainy afternoon in San Francisco. That's what I'm sort of thinking about.
So when you boil that down to like a statement or a word, can you isolate a way to describe that superpower?
Either sort of growth or evolution, I suppose. That's what I sort of am drawn to. Um, Another one of my favorite quotes is, "The only constant is change,"
Mm-hmm.
and you better get used to it, because nothing stays the same and everything's always changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the universe itself is always evolving. So those sort of two concepts, I think, go hand in hand. So growth and evolution, both in the natural world, but also in the business setting.
Well, on the flip side of the super passion or superpower, there's sort of the anti-passion or the kryptonite piece. What have you learned about yourself? Are the things that kind of wear you down or suck your energy while you're on this path that you have to keep a close eye on?
The ability to focus on what's the most important thing that I should be spending my time on right now. I think as a founder, and just as a human living in this world, there are so many distractions. There are so many things pulling at your attention, and there are so many ways to spend your time that seem important, but often are distractions, or chasing, sort of vanity, metrics or different other things. So I think that's probably been the hardest, is like at every point in time, knowing what is the most important thing that I should be spending my time on to push the company forward, in the highest leverage way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It is such a complicated world, not even just being a founder, just being human and the pace of change, but starting a tech company and doing it in a way where you're raising venture capital and trying to solve a really big, complex problem that other people have tried and failed, or, tried and succeeded in their own way, but doing yours different. I mean, just talk about the endless level of complexity day to day to figure out what to focus on. Yeah. Why don't we give some background on where you've come from? I like to do this in the same way that I do when I'm talking to candidates I'm recruiting for projects. So in the
Mm.
first 5 minutes or so of meeting somebody that I've sourced and I'm considering putting on a project, I'll say to them, I want you to tell me your entire life story with an artificial time cap of 5 minutes. And you can't get it wrong. There's no such thing as leaving something out. I like to see with this self-imposed pressure what you feel are the most important things that I need to know about your life from its beginning up until today that matter most. So I want to give you that same exercise and have you hold yourself to that
Sure.
same 5 minute time cap. So whenever you're ready, let's do it.
All right. So, born and raised in Melbourne, Australia. Did all of my school years there and university in Melbourne. Um, Throughout those years, I was always starting little like side hustle businesses, like selling Coke cans and chocolate out of my locker at school, or I owned a few vending machines in university, which were wildly lucrative. Definitely a good business for anyone that's looking to get into it. But then, end of uni, I then, like most Australians, took some time off to go backpacking. And plan was to spend about 6 to 9 months backpacking by myself through Europe. Started in London and just loved the culture and everything else in London. So I actually applied for a few jobs as I was backpacking around, and did a phone interview in Copenhagen and an online test in a hostel in Munich, and ended up landing this management consulting grad job, which was at the time the number one grad program in Europe with PricewaterhouseCoopers. So then moved to London and did my kind of training as a management consultant, and then really got drawn into technology and digital and emerging tech, working with these big Fortune 500 companies and kind of understanding their problems and how these new technologies were kind of disrupting their business models, and really enjoyed it. But as I was starting to get more exposure to startups, I knew that I loved the pace and the sort of environment and culture of startups, much more than these sort of large orgs. So I'd also gone on exchange to California in uni, and to me, it just made so much sense to move to Silicon Valley. And I moved out here by myself. Had 10 weeks to find a job before the government kicked me out. I managed to land a job at this 8-person health tech startup. Shout out to Eric Applegate at Doc Matter for taking a chance on me, and helped them, with all kinds of different things, right hand to the CEO, setting up the initial growth funnels for the company, and went deep into the growth hacking world and understanding how to acquire the first 10, 20, 100 customers, and loved it, and just started in my spare time just working with my friends who were founders, going through accelerators like Y Combinator and 500 startups, and then on the side just started helping them set up their own growth funnels, and realized actually there's a bit of a business in here and they can pay me money for it. So I left and then started my kind of one-man consulting shop and working just word of mouth, with these founders that were coming out of these accelerators. And at a certain point, I think maybe in 2016, 17, something like that, they like, what, getting these customers is great, but what's actually the hardest thing for us right now that I'm spending 50 to 80% of my time on as a founder is actually just hiring engineers. And we need the most help with that. Can you help with that? So I was like, all right, let's try applying some of these growth tools and tactics on the recruiting side. And that's where this sort of idea of outbound candidate sourcing as a service first came about. And it just, caught fire. And at that point, my best friend from Melbourne moved to San Francisco, and we started Automately together, and we started scaling it up and started building a team. It was profitable from day one. Worked with 36 clients, and ranging from Simply Safe to Pandora to Cameo, and one of the biggest logos was Sequoia Capital, a VC firm who had their own in-house recruiters, and they were trying to figure out how to solve this problem for their portfolio companies. And they were in a bit of a build versus buy decision. So they said, why don't you come and join us full time and bring that tech in-house? So we did, and they acquired us in their first and only acquisition. And I was then in-house at Sequoia as founder in residence, building them other custom tools, initially for the recruiting team, and then helping the investors as well with the data science team to build out this custom suite of tools for the firm. Built about 12 different tools when I was there with an amazing team, and then hit the end of my vest and shook off the golden handcuffs and wanted to get back to building my own company. So I started The Swarm. That was in mid-21, and I've been building it ever since.
Wow. I've never actually heard that whole story. Helping your friends that were coming out of these accelerators with some of the initial customer acquisition, and then listening to the market and the needs of people saying, we need to hire these engineers, and then realizing, oh, these same tools could be applied to the recruiting side. What do you think was the major issue for them hiring engineers? Was it competing? Was it just the time involved in it? What do you think was driving that initial pain at that time?
Yeah, so these were early stage startups without any branding and without any real mechanism of reaching these top tier candidates. So what they were finding was that, they were losing all the best candidates to Facebook and Google and these big tech giants, right? Who had this established brand and so what they were trying to do was reach out like a headhunter directly to these candidates. But the technology they had was LinkedIn, and they would send them maybe one email, and then that was it. And you can imagine the kind of messages that most of these founders who were these technical founders would send, just this one-off, no follow-ups, not really selling themselves very well, so the response rates were pretty poor. So I introduced them to the ability to send multi-step email campaigns with very personalized messaging and the very, very close fit, sort of ideal candidate persona, qualification criteria, with multiple levels of vetting and just doing it at scale, right? So going from maybe pinging 10 to 20 engineers a week to doing 10x that. So you can imagine how the pipeline grew. And this was also before every other recruiter kind of had access to these email campaign tools as well. So that as a channel, it was a lot more effective, and response rates were quite high back in those days.
Yeah, one thing I learned about you really early was that you were on the leading edge of all of these tech tools that were sort of in sales automation or marketing automation.
I think at that point, I was like a sort of growth consultant. And I was writing the data buyers guide, and I was comparing all these different data vendors against each other: ZoomInfo versus DiscoverOrg versus Prospectify, and sort of for the first time, in the industry was and I was working with a bunch of other really talented folks, like really trying to give a buyer an apples to apples comparison. And there just wasn't anything really available. Like this was, G2 was just getting started. There wasn't really any other websites that would sort of compare. You'd have to literally just sit through hours of demos from every company.
Yeah, you mentioned this time frame where recruiters and other people hadn't really had access to these tools, and now they've proliferated like to a degree that's insane. So there's different problems now, right? Which is interesting being in the space you're in, because now you're competing with a lot of clutter. There's tremendous perceived competition. And so the need to use the customer development process in your own business that you've learned over time when you did some of the consulting for these startups becomes even more important to stand out, differentiate. And not only that, but to actually build a product that, as you tell the story, can deliver this unique experience that is taking what has been attempted by many, I mean, LinkedIn included, right? LinkedIn itself is built to create these different connections within a person's network for business development, recruiting, and everything else. So I want to really dig into the conception of the swarm as it relates to this sort of timeline of all the proliferation of these different tools that are all built to try to solve a similar problem. With all the experience and background you had in doing all these tool comparisons and implementing them, there's more than just, hey, founder, you need the right tech stack. I mean, it goes way beyond just the right technology. There's like a philosophy and a psychology to it, right? You can have all the tools in the world, but if your messaging sucks, you're not going to get responses and engagement and conversion, right? So walk me through, at what point did you have that aha where you said, there's nothing that exists that does what I see needs to be done? Did you have an epiphany moment? Or was it a series of things over time that was like, this is just a trend, a pattern, a gap I see? What was that like for you?
I think there's some aha moment. When I was at Sequoia, I saw how the best founders of all of the name brand companies that you've come to know today, like Airbnb and DoorDash and Zoom and all these companies, the founders had this superpower of being able to tap into their investors' networks to get these warm introductions for these really critical introductions to top talent, which one amazing VP, let alone C-suite, can change the trajectory of a company. So imagine doing that, 5, 10, 100 times over. Introductions to customers, the ability to add a logo can change whether you raise a round or not. It's kind of literally can be life and death for a company. And then what is life and death is cash and the ability to raise capital. And investors are way more likely to take a meeting and actually invest if there's a warm introduction. So I sort of saw this, and again, so I saw this pattern. I suppose it was more of a pattern than an aha moment specifically, but of these founders who would come to Sequoia and be very methodical and systematic, and they'd say, here's what we need, for this month, for this quarter, here's the target companies that we're going after. I need you to look through your firm's network, and we would have someone whose job it was full time to literally be searching through the firm's inbox, our internal system to check what connections we had. Would then go through everyone's LinkedIn, looking through mutual connections, to then create a dossier, basically, of these potential leads from our network that we would then review and decide how we wanted to engage with. And I saw this repeated again and again across the firm. So the recruiting team, they'd be doing back channel references. And especially during the pandemic, getting conviction on a senior executive hire was really tough when you couldn't actually meet them in person. There's a lot of these startups we're working with that were hiring for the first time, maybe a VP of marketing or sales, or maybe even bringing on a co-founder. And they had real reservations about whether this would work because they couldn't meet the person face to face. So they'd come to us and say, who in your network do you know that's worked with this person before, so we can get more conviction? And again, the exercise would be, as a firm, we would look through everyone's LinkedIn, find mutual connections, look through emails, and then try and look through previous work histories that the person worked at, and sort of think through, okay, who else has worked at those companies, and try and Sherlock Holmes with the big whiteboard, putting the red string between people's faces and trying to map this network manually, each time. And then we'd be doing this, 10 to 20 times a week. So the majority of the team's job was at one point doing these background references. And then the customer partnerships team was doing the same thing, trying to make these intros between these early stage startups and these later stage enterprises, and within the portfolio, outside the portfolio. So just it felt just super manual, and my mind just kept sort of trying to zoom out and be like, is there some sort of system or a machine that could be connecting all of these people in the network, and why haven't we mapped all these relationships? And that was sort of the catalyst for starting to build this network mapping tool internally, which then was sort of the proof of concept I needed to sort of see that it was feasible. And there had been a few things that had shifted in the market, especially on the data side, that kind of unlocked a few of these things that previous attempts had failed at, because they didn't either have access to the depth of data, freshness of data. They were too limited or narrow in their use case. And there's all these interesting learnings. I've talked to half a dozen or more founders who have attempted this in the past and it didn't work for whatever reason. Almost every investor I talked to said there's so many dead bodies in the water. People who have attempted this before. And yet everyone agreed that it should exist. And that there was something here, but from my understanding, the reason why I think it didn't exist was just from a data perspective, that the data just wasn't available really to do this up until now.
So it wasn't so much the approach to the way the technology utilized the data as it was the data itself either lacked the depth, the freshness, or sort of the limited use case. Is that right?
Yeah, as well as the user experience. Right? So there's a huge psychology around trying to get everyone in a network to opt in to share their network, and the amount of friction that's involved in that. And we've really found this, and this was the death knell for a number of these companies who tried this, which relied on everyone going to LinkedIn, exporting a CSV, coming to the platform, importing the CSV, and then after all that, it would actually only be a static import, and then the data would become stale as they connected with more people on LinkedIn, and as those people change jobs, which about a quarter every year will be changing, so that data is going to get stale pretty quickly. Within 2 years, half your data set is going to be stale. So and that was just one attempt. There was other attempts that relied even on the user actually manually inputting in every single field, name and title and company. So there's just no way that was going to work. So we knew we had to build this in a way that was almost magical for the user, where in a click of a button, they could map the majority of their company's network without needing everyone to sign up or do anything. That was the kind of holy grail that we were trying to build towards. And we've now kind of figured it out. We've cracked it. And that's the foundation which you can then build on top of. Once you've mapped the network, you can then operationalize the relationships. And that's where things get super interesting, right? That's where you can use it for recruiting, you can use it for sales, you can use it for fundraising. Investors can use it for diligence, deal sourcing, their own fundraising, their portco support. So there's a myriad of use cases. But a lot of people talk about minimum viable product. I think we had a minimum viable platform that we needed to build. And that's now effectively built. And now we're in a position where we can start building on top of that.
Well, you talked about the user experience, like the change management involved and getting everybody on the same page to buy into this idea being equally as hard, if not harder, than maybe even the data accessibility and keeping it fresh.
People are always the hardest in any change management. process.
So it lends itself to the need to have a UX UI designer that is stellar and an engineering team that is stellar, because we're at the place now with APIs and whatever else to be able to have certain type of back and forth communication between their APIs, LinkedIn and otherwise. And the cost of accessing that data can just kill a startup if it's not cheap enough, right? And then you were talking about that was manual. You talked about the team at Sequoia that was doing some of this back channel referencing and so forth, and feeling so. I'm sure the whole team was just feeling the pain of how taxing that was manually, right? That was just a repeated thing that was like, oh, this sucks, but we got to get it done, right? And so you were sifting through emails to look for depth of relationship, number of emails open, depth of exchange. Maybe the text itself was analyzed in some way, but to figure out what is a real relationship score or something like that, right? So a lot of this, the genesis of this idea, it sounds like was really birthed in that workflow as you were sort of building what you said, I think was 12 tools while you were at Sequoia, on top of the fact that you brought tools in that they acquired as part of the acquisition. So you said first and only acquisition Sequoia has made. Did I hear that right?
Yeah.
You got them as a customer somehow, right? Along with what, 3 dozen other big logos.
Yeah.
Did you initiate that conversation?
Yeah. I'll walk you through. So Kelly Liu, one of the best recruiters in the world, who's at Sequoia, she was tasked with learning about new tools and tech that were out there that could be beneficial for the portfolio. So we had started working with a couple of the Sequoia portfolio companies, and we, my co-founder Jules and I, sort of realized that it's quite a small world, and the distribution from VCs to their portcos, if they make a recommendation, is incredibly high, right? Like if an investor says you should go use this tool, like startups will just use it, don't even think about it. So like if we can get in with a few of these VCs as a channel partner and for distribution, this is going to be amazing. And we made a list, obviously, of all the top Sand Hill Road firms, and Sequoia was number one. So we're like, let's start there. We've already got some relationships, we've got some inroads. We're introduced to Kelly, and she got it. She loved it. She understood the pain of sourcing your own candidates, and if she could just hand that over to someone else, that'd be fantastic. So she got us started with a couple more portfolio companies, and then we started working more with the internal team. And Jamie Butt, who is the talent partner leading the team, she was also quite a visionary, and she was thinking about how do we differentiate Sequoia against these other Sand Hill Road firms, and how can we build something that will be helpful for the founders, after they receive a check from Sequoia in their company building efforts, and how can we as a Sequoia talent team really up level ourselves. So this was sort of the mandate that Alfred Lin and Carla Schambach, who were, she was sort of reporting to at the time, had given her. And as we started talking, it became evident that the product that we built and the outcomes that we were driving would be very interesting, because we were working with all of her customers, which were early stage startups already, and they were telling Sequoia this was their number one challenge. You raise a round, and then a number one challenge is hiring world-class engineers to come and join our no-name startup, right? So it was a problem and a pain that they felt acutely. And then we had, as I mentioned before, found this interesting model where we could scale up at a very high quality the number of passive candidates that we were engaging, and then leading to these predictable pipelines of interviews for the founder. And then it was a really nice combination, because then the Sequoia recruiters were able to coach the founders and build some of the process, and help with interview questions, and the combination of the two just made a lot of sense. So we went to go raise a round. That was the sort of the catalyst for it. We were seeing it was working. We're like, let's go raise a round to scale this up. So
this is for Automately, right?
This is for Automately, yeah. And Jamie said, well, let's come in and have a chat with us. So I drove to the Sequoia office on Sand Hill Road, and I remember getting out and seeing the big Sequoia sign and walking into the lobby, and the receptionists all friendly greeting me and directing me to the meeting room. And of course, it was like the big boardroom, conference room with all the logos up on the wall, Google and Airbnb and Atari and everything. And then after a few minutes, Jenny comes in, and she's very sweet and friendly, and just very complimentary about what we're doing, and says basically, we're thinking about building something like this for the firm, but instead, how would you feel about joining us full time and bringing the tech and the product in house? So that was the catalyst for it. It was her interesting kind of idea, and then we worked through the mechanics of how it would work and how the structure would all sort of work, and pitched it to the partnership and got the green light. So it was a interesting point in time where we hadn't obviously raised the round, so we hadn't taken any outside funding. We were a pretty lean team, so it was the right size and right time and right place for it to happen. And when we were presented with that opportunity, we were sort of, my co-founder and I really looked at it and sort of said, we could keep scaling this thing up. I think this thing's working, and there's a lot of risk of competitive entrance, and our defensibility of what we're building, was pretty low. And on the other side, were these kind of two outsiders, these kind of no-name guys from Australia who didn't have the traditional CV of Stanford or Google or YC or any of those Silicon Valley like check marks. So I kind of, we thought, all right, having acquired by Sequoia in the CV would be a pretty nice thing, to have. And then also the learning of being inside the building and seeing how they thought about the world would be worth it, and we're still in our 20s, we're still young guys, we're like, single, it's like this makes a lot of sense. So we did it. And thankfully they were amazing about it. When we joined, I was a bit worried that we're going to be joining this sort of back office HR function and shunted to the back of the room, but it was quite the opposite. They were really generous. They said, you built this thing, what else would you build if you had the budget? And then budget, which was incredible for a team of 4 engineers and a designer, and we set about building other tools to help to up level the recruiting team. And I can dive into more of those products, but they're still used on a daily basis. And then we kind of caught the attention of the rest of the firm and started building out tools with the rest of the IT and data science teams, and went from there.
So one thing I don't know if you know this, you were working at Sequoia. You might remember I came and visited you when you were there, and we took a walk. I think I just started Bearhug, maybe. No, I wasn't at Bearhug yet. I was still at Clockwork. But one thing I don't think you know, because I'm not sure we were really close at that point, I had gone in and pitched Clockwork to Jamie Bott and a team of like 20 people in that one of those same boardrooms. I remember the paintings on the wall too. Right. So, I won't go into too much detail there, but I guess in some sense you won. They were like looking at that as a solution to solve some of the same set of problems. Clearly from that point on, you had gone in and helped build a lot of the tooling for that. So that's really cool how this all kind of weaves together.
And Clockwork was the front end of Automately. Basically, that was like the client interface that we used for every client that we worked with, where they could see, which candidates they had, with like a dashboard. And it was really slick and worked really well for us. So there was that natural synergy, but yeah, I think obviously it was a bit of a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I remember when introducing you to Christian, the CEO of Clockwork, and you'd walked away and I was in the office, and at the time I was helping lead their sales marketing function. And he goes, David's really smart. And he was talking about all the pipeline metrics you had talked about when you built these funnels for sourcing. And he was excited about the partnership that we put together there because you were able to get a level of visibility and transparency that was only done through like Google Sheets or something else prior to that, right?
That's right. Yeah, it was all just Google Sheets before that.
Very cool. So you're at Sequoia, you're building these tools. You've got a 2-year earnout or whatever, golden handcuffs, I guess works just as well.
Yes, vesting schedule. Yeah,
How did,
yeah,
can we talk about how they felt about you starting your own thing using some of the stuff that you built there? Was that clean, and are they championing you today?
yeah. They're on the cap table. We're very friendly. I'm in close touch with a number of the partners there, and a lot of the talent team has moved on to greener pastures and doing other things. But at the time when I left, it was definitely very mutual that I had reached this point where I wanted to start something new, and I'd hit the end of my vest, shook off the golden handcuffs, as you said, and wanted to get back to being a founder. And I just learned so much that I wanted to put into practice. And also at the same time, they were doing a restructuring, a reorg, and they were trying to consolidate, these disparate product teams, into this one unified product team that would serve not just the talent, but also the investors as well as the founders, led by Vicky Peng, reporting up into Jess Lee. And, it was the right sort of moment in time. And also, the market was pulling me, man. It was mid 21, it was booming, and I felt that it was a good time to clip out and try and raise a little bit of money to start my next thing.
Well, from an outsider's perspective, listening to this story, they're going to go, David just seems to put one foot in front of the other and just have perfect opportunity, success after success after success. I'm sure that there are moments along the timeline where you faced real rejection, real failure, or maybe all those are stacked up against you now and you're going to have to really push through those brick walls today. But looking back across the whole course of your career, what are the 2 to 3 biggest kind of whoa moments that you've experienced that so far in your life have really shocked or surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many rejections and setbacks and failures. Obviously, this is the happy golden path, and you can rewrite history as whoever you want. When I finished uni, I actually applied for dozens of grad jobs in Australia. I didn't get anything. Like went into the second, third, final round at a bunch of these larger management consulting firms and some other firms as well, but ended up not receiving any offers. And I think throughout my schooling, I had always opted to travel and to spend any time that wasn't uni, trying to go backpack around Southeast Asia or Central America, or anything I could, just save up all my money and then spend all my money and actually go into debt a little bit traveling, and then rinse and repeat. And I didn't do any internships. I didn't really have that much professional experience, until I finished. So that was, I think that hurt me, and that's why I didn't get any of these very competitive, grad jobs. But then, that obviously led to the London experience, and I think they sort of saw the journey with a little bit more of a holistic picture, and wasn't as much of a tick box exercise of have you worked at similar firm before? If yes, then we can give you a job. It was more of a whole self, which I really liked about. They were a fantastic firm, and aside from that, the early days of Automately, I think, were also very challenging. Right, it was just me trying to figure out how I can earn enough money month to month to pay my rent and to eat. Living in San Francisco by myself was a super expensive place. And in those early days, I wasn't making a heap of money. The early stage startups, didn't have a lot of money to pay me. So I was, I was eking it out, and I was going into debt, month on month. Like I was taking loans from my family just to be able to pay the rent. But I knew that if I sort of could stick with it, that I was learning so much, and I was figuring it out, that I had the confidence in myself and I kind of backed myself. But I was a very lucky, privileged position where I was able to lean on the family, to take those loans, and obviously some credit card loans as well. But was since then able to pay that back. Yeah, that's all paid off, so to speak. But that was a really tough time for sure, especially if you've ever lived in San Francisco or New York, anywhere else where it's expensive, man. Like, if you don't have any money, you're earning, much below your friendship group, and everyone goes out for drinks. You can like one beer, and then you have to kind of pretend like you don't want any more. Or, I couldn't. I remember my co-founder and I were just like, we're too poor to date. We can't date because you go out on a date and the girl expects you to buy a couple of drinks and maybe some food, and it'd be like $100, $150. And like, just can't afford to do that right now. So we'd have to be very creative and go for a walk in the park or something, get a coffee. But there was real financial pressures for sure for a long time. I did not have any money, and I was negative net worth. So that's probably part of the story that I wouldn't normally tell people.
Well, so when you and Jules were debating the future of Automately, what was that moment like for the two of you to talk about? Did you have goosebumps, and was it a pretty easy decision? Obviously, you talked through already sort of the upside of the credibility, and it would make up for some of the gaps maybe on your resume. I'm curious about the process of that decision, as well as the moment when you made the decision to say yes. What was the way that you celebrated?
Yeah, the funny thing is we'd actually 3 months before had just moved to LA. So
I remember that.
We moved to Santa Monica. Yeah. We're living in Venice on Abbot Kinney, and just two dudes moved down there. And then funnily enough, we both started dating these girls who lived in San Francisco weeks before we moved. I was 2 weeks before we moved, and she's now my wife, and we have 2 kids together. So it worked out. But it was crazy where we were seeing these 2 single dudes when we planned to move, and then we by the time we moved down there, we had these long distance girlfriends back in San Francisco. So we were in LA, but loving it, really enjoying the lifestyle and everything for 3 months. And then as part of the acquisition, they wanted us to move back to San Francisco and work 5 days in the Menlo Park office. So that was a big consideration. We also had 2 other folks on our team, Herman and Brianna, who had also moved with us to LA from SF, who also would have to move back. So, as a team, we had to think through all of that, as well as the main thing for Jules and I was handing over the keys to someone else, building to someone else's vision and letting go of control. And that was a big question mark, how that would go. But obviously, thankfully, it worked out well. They were cool about it. And I had a lot of autonomy to work the way we wanted to internally at the firm. But the way we celebrated, I think we went to some bar in Santa Monica, and had a bottle of champagne that we popped, and had all our friends around, and had a big night. But then pretty quick after, we then packed everything into a U-Haul and drove it up, and that was it.
It wasn't a retirement moment. It was a let's go get to work moment, right?
Then real work began.
Well, how much risk did you feel like you were really owning when you took the exit? I mean, you had the relationships, you had the proof of concept, right? And you had to hire and find the sort of technical lead to help put this all together to start actually building the platform. And how were you able to leverage a lot of the existing relationships with members of the team moving into the world of the Swarm and starting to raise money?
Yeah. So when I left, we had also just had my first son, Gabe. So he was about 8 to 10 weeks, I think, when I left Sequoia,
Mhm.
which was incredible timing, obviously.
Perfect timing.
So there's a lot of pressure and stress from that side of being like, what am I doing? Why am I leaving this, cushy, job on Sand Hill Road for the unknown? At that point, hadn't raised any funding, so didn't know when the next paycheck was going to come from. But the next, sort of 3 to 6 months from that was me just talking to as many founders and investors as possible and trying to doing as much discovery as I could to really validate this kind of core concept. And then by the end of 21, I had a few investors that I'd sort of talked to that um, were interested in putting together a pre-seed round, and it was still just me at that point. So it was just me and Swarm and this kind of idea, which was like in a Google Doc, investment memo that I put
Mhm.
together. And that's where the pre-seed sort of came together. And that's where, yeah, Fred Eric at Contrary Capital, Kevin Mahaffey, the founder of Lookout, Vivek, the co-founder of Superhuman, and Sander, the co-founder of Thumbtack, and a range of really talented operators and angels, all himself included, all came together to give that first pre-seed round, and, put together what we needed to sort of set the foundation of the company. And then the obviously the question mark was, all right, this is a software company, who's going to build the software? So that's where I spent the next 3 to 6 months then really talking to as many technical
Mm.
co-founders as I could and trying to find the best fit. And I talked to so many different people, from my network, from these like co-founder dating
Mhm.
things, and in the end, found my co-founder and CTO Michał, who's based in Poland and had a previous exit to Uber and had been splitting his time between San Francisco and Poland. And we just clicked, and the timing was right for him. He had a young kid as well, and like he had some success, but was now kind of looking for his next big swing, and loved the idea and was really keen to roll up his sleeves and said, look, you know, I can hire the engineers. I've worked with some really talented engineers, and I can pull them in. We can extend the runway because it's about 50% of the price of Bay Area
Mhm.
engineers, and we can set this up. In the working hours, the team's used to working with San Francisco, so they're happy to work a little bit later in the evening. So we have a lot of overlap time during the day, and it's a hungry team that hustles and gets shit done. And everyone's seasoned. Everyone's 10 plus years. Some 15, 20 years. Everyone's senior. Most people actually are working parents as well. So it's a real culture of high performance, but people who kind of have their shit together and kind of know what they're doing. But obviously, we really help each other out along the way.
Well, I can't say I've been super close to thousands of companies, but I've definitely had engagements with hundreds of startups, right? And I've
Yeah,
never seen something develop so quickly, right? Because I've been involved from the very beginning, and to see where you are today is crazy. Like to get the investor updates and to see how far the product has come in terms of its maturity. I want to talk about the different use cases because you started off with a recruiting use case, kind of was the initial push, and
yeah,
and then you've seen obviously that it's not just a recruiting use case that you're trying to solve. Can we talk about sort of the evolution of what the lessons that you've learned in the iteration of the different use cases up to where it is today?
yeah. So 2021, raised the pre-seed. mid 22, then we had the technical team, sort of in place, and a designer, and at the same time, Olivier, who's our head of growth and our chief growth officer, joined. He was actually one of our very earliest employees.
Crushing it, by the way. Shout out to Olivier.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Just yeah. He's quick backstory, just a side note from him. Like, he was running his own branding and growth agency for 7 years, worked with hundreds of startups, and shut it down to come and join us full time. And it's he's one of those just 10x, 100x key early team members who has shifted the trajectory of the company, and he's incredible. Based in Denver now, but I first overlapped with him when we were doing the Automately rebrand,
Mm-hmm.
and just as we finished the rebrand, Sequoia acquired us. So I never saw the light of day, I think, but it was amazing. It was really, really slick. Anyway, so mid 22, we had the team in place, started coding, and so my background, was at that point pretty heavily recruiting. We had a lot of recruiting design partners and folks who these early kind of design customers that we're working with for this recruiting use case, right? The intention was then to expand into sales, expand into investors, and for the personal use case as well. Let's start with recruiting. End of 22, we then, after about 6 months, sort of had this MVP that we were ready to start testing, and released it to our first sort of cohort, and then the market totally shifted on us, right? Start of 23, layoffs, people cutting back on hiring, freezing hiring completely. And the feedback we got was, this is great, and I like it and it works, but we're just not hiring right now. So we kind of went back to the drawing board a little bit, and as we're continuing to talk to these customers, especially these founders of startups, they're like, we don't need help with recruiting right now, but what we do need help with is customers, and finding warm intros to our customers would be incredibly helpful right now. So can your platform do that? And we said, yep, that was always the plan. We need to add, a few things like company level filters and profiles and things like that. Added those in, relaunched it, and then as more and more startups used it, the importance of getting visibility of the investors' networks became so critical. And we saw it was like a 5 to 10x multiple of tapping into an external investors' networks versus a team member's networks. And as the investors got exposure to it, they're like, this is interesting. Like, we could use this as a firm. And I knew that, obviously at Sequoia, that investors have a lot of different use cases for mapping and leveraging the network. So we then started onboarding startups as well as VCs. It was very organic. We never really intended to start targeting VCs, but they got exposure to it as a super important constituent in the value chain. And then, from my experience, I sort of knew that customer pretty well. So I could sort of talk to it, and we added a few new things that they needed, like, the ability to add tags to your network to structure the qualitative information that sits in people's heads, and to add lists and things like that. And then now, we're got a really strong base of VCs that are on the platform, and more joining every week. And the sales use case, which is very robust, and the recruiting use case is now actually picking back up again. So, as with all these things, it's very cyclical, and the needs of companies, sort of picks back up that they need to start hiring again. And so we're seeing more interest for the recruiting use case. And then the fourth use case, so you've got recruiting, you've got sales, you've got investors. And the fourth use case, fundraising for startups and also fundraising for fund managers, right? Identifying LPs. So founders trying to raise around, find warm intros to new investors, looking through their existing investors networks to find connections. All of those things that people were trying to use LinkedIn for, or sending out in monthly investor update emails. They want to have any suggestions for these types of investors. They could then just have access to that data. They could reveal all those connections. And then the fifth use case, so the final use case, which we haven't focused on too much, but will, I think, be a part of the next chapter, is then the personal, sort of individual use case.
Yeah.
So call it the personal CRM type use case, where we haven't spent too much time focusing on that yet, but there's definite interest in there, whether you're a job seeker, whether you're a prosumer, kind of superhuman type user that wants to manage their own network, have a unified view of all of your relationships in one place, be more diligent at how you network and manage your relationships. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of functionality we need to build. So that's why we focus more on the company's side and being more B2B. But there is a definite path towards expanding into that at some point in the future.
Okay, so we talked earlier about technology can only take a person in what they're trying to do so far, right? It provides them the sort of infrastructure, the skeleton, but then you've got to put the meat on the bones, right? In this particular way, we can use technology to map the strength and connection of these different components of a person's network. So when you think about the change management that's required for the world to adopt this new way of doing things, can we compare and contrast sort of the points of friction for people to understand how to shift from what they're doing now to doing it inside the Swarm platform? And what have you learned about making that process easier and enabling people to go beyond just here's some technology?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think this is some of the hardest parts of building software, which is the change management of getting people to change their habits and their workflows. So much as we can, we're trying to fit into people's existing workflows, but there are times where it just doesn't work. So the easiest comparison and contrast is probably against cold outbound. At a very high level, we're talking about creating a list of leads. Now, this could be using some third-party data platform or service, whether it's for sales like ZoomInfo, whether it's for recruiting like LinkedIn, whether it's for fundraising like PitchBook or Crunchbase. But you have this list. Say it's like 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000, either individuals or companies that you're going after, right? Then once you have this list, you then figure out who you're going to contact. So that's where this contact data enrichment comes in. Maybe you've already got that. Maybe you need to use another service, layer that in. You've then got the contact data, and then you're engaging those leads that you've identified. So how do we engage those tools? If it's for sales, using sales engagement tools like Outreach or SalesLove. On the recruiting side, maybe using Gem or Top Funnel or some of these other outbound engagement platforms. And you can send to that list of 1,000 companies and contacts now very easily this campaign that gets sent out, and this template that gets sent out. Now, the problem is that almost everyone now has access to these mass emailing tools. And it's not just email, it's actually on the phone as well. So these power dialing solutions which blast through numbers, and the scale of the touch points is now exponentially higher than it ever was before. So as a prospective buyer, your experience is now that your mailbox is overflowing with all of these undifferentiated offers and emails that all look kind of similar, but it's this generic template that's not really personalized at all to what you're doing. Your voicemail is full of these messages from salespeople that isn't relevant to what you're doing, and there's just your LinkedIn inbox is the same, overflowing. There's all of this noise that is just bombarding you. So as a buyer, it's just too cumbersome to actually stop and thoroughly look through every single offer to see if it's a fit. It's easier just to push it all away into the bin or to archive it and kind of say, I'm just not going to look at any of it, because even if 1% of this stuff is interesting, it's going to take me 99% of my time to look through it all. So the way that people are buying is sort of shifting more towards the consumer experience, where people are now doing a lot more of their own research, and they're leveraging their personal relationships to ask for recommendations, and they're trusting the people in their network to help them to shortcut that buyer journey and that research and that discovery. So there's with that, there's this sort of shift of how people are either purchasing new tools or finding their next jobs or deciding where to allocate their capital, depending on the use case. But the common thread is that they are, by an order of magnitude, more influenced by people that they know and trust than by any random stranger on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a fact. It's you can call it 10x, 50x, 100x more likely if there's a trust that exists in the equation with someone they already know. So the playbook, I suppose, that's being written now is how do you leverage that trust and how do you operationalize that trust at scale, but also how do you build that trust at scale? Because it's not just this concept of take from my network. You also want to be giving back, and you also want to be building this trust that you can then convert at some point in the
Reciprocate
future.
too. Yeah, right.
Reciprocate, exactly. Yeah. So there's this elevated sort of understanding and appreciation for your network and the relationships that you have that I think historically people have either taken for granted or just not really considered in a more a really thoughtful way. And that's why I'm sort of really excited about this kind of new next era and this next chapter of kind of what's getting formed in real time, which is the human relationships and experiences like actually becoming more critical than ever. And with the introduction of generative AI, the amount of noise that's getting produced and the amount of artificial intelligence that is out there is only increasing the noise and pushing people even more towards human relationships.
Yeah.
So we're actually a really great benefactor of this huge tidal wave of generative AI, and which is pushing everyone away from machine and robot driven content and outreach and engagement. And instead, it's focusing on the human relationships and the trust between humans. And at its core, that's kind of what we're trying to unlock for companies and for for the individuals. And it's something that is yours, right? It's like your relationships, and you take that with you from company to company, and you grow that over your lifetime. So this isn't some transactional, like, let me try and trick you with this clever subject line or this, this sudden like intent data that you visited my website. Now I'm going to like jump on you this lead. It's instead this much more like long-term games with long-term people and building and fostering this ecosystem that sits around you as an individual, but obviously scaled up to as a company, all of the relationships that you have, that you should be taking that long-term view and moving away from this very myopic, short-term, transactional, world that we had been living in.
That brought together so many pieces of the deeper core of the vision that you had at the beginning and how it is being realized. Like you said, zooming out, right? And looking at these different, what for some are headwinds, and for you, I think will prove out to be really strong tailwinds, where this value of this network. Do you want to talk for a minute about this go to network way of explaining? I
Yeah,
think it's a really cool way to kind of frame the category, if you will.
that's right. Yeah, and it's a category that is being built, and we're trying to lead that charge. I think there's great appreciation for it in the industry. That the contrast again is the traditional go-to-market, where we have a product or a service or solution, and we're now bringing it to market, and we're sort of spraying and praying. We're spreading it as far and wide as we can. We're hiring as many
Mm-hmm.
SDRs to blast it as far as we can. We're hiring as many account executives as we can to capture that interest and try and push them through the funnel to try and close them. And that's been the traditional way of building a company and scaling up your revenue, which is scaling up the go-to-market team and spending more on advertising to increase the awareness, spending more on the humans on the sales team to increase those touch points in the market. I think the go-to-network approach sort of encapsulates what I was talking about before, which is actually leveraging all the relationships that a firm has and building and nurturing those relationships for the long term, and moving away from this transactional ideology of trying to push your product onto these potentially interested buyers, but most of the time they're not in market, and instead focusing um, on supporting everyone's kind of journey and learning and development around where they're at, and then when they're ready to buy, they know about you and they trust you because you've built that relationship over time, and through your network, your connectivity into all of these different accounts and people is a lot more just a lot more powerful than what most firms have appreciated in the past. So now you can not only see all of the relationships and connections that you have, but you can deliberately and intentionally nurture and foster those relationships to build that ecosystem around your company that's going to help you to close many more customers in a much more friendly and delightful way that's a win-win-win for everybody involved.
How do you score the strength of a person's network? Can we talk about some of the feature sets of the platform that allows these interconnected nodes to come out with some sort of usable score? How do you score that?
Yeah. So everyone's got their LinkedIn connections, right? Every professional and knowledge worker has connected with hundreds or thousands of people on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. The problem is that it's very noisy and it's not a really true representation of your
Right.
relationships. So what we realize is that to carve out the signal from the noise, we need to overlay some additional data sets of relationships. Now, your email inbox and your
Mm-hmm.
calendar is a great source of
Mm.
data where you can see who you've been swapping emails with, the frequency and recency of those interactions, the calendar, events that you've had with
Yeah.
people, and then check. Okay, are you also connected on LinkedIn? Okay, those two inputs together, can be can be more interesting than if you just connect on LinkedIn alone. And then another big sort of aha moment was for a lot of these professionals that we're working with, they have these work connections, these previous colleagues that they've overlapped with at the same company at the same time. Now, that isn't currently mapped on the internet. There's no easy way for you as an individual to go and see all of my past colleagues. Like, I have probably connected with a few of them on LinkedIn, but I haven't been systematic enough to connect with every single person at every single company I've ever worked at. And we sort of cracked something on the data side where we realized if we could scale up the data set that we had to the point where we had almost complete coverage of all of the professionals and all of the potential previous colleagues that people would have, then we could calculate that for them. So we put together a data set of around 800 million profiles at 40 million companies, and we can now look through someone's work experience, see the dates that they were at a certain company, the location they were at, and then factor in how long was the overlap with these individuals. Was it a month? Was it 2 years? Was it in the same location, the same function? And then stack rank all of their previous colleagues to then provide them with this short list of the most likely previous colleagues that they know. And then you combine that with the email calendar, with LinkedIn, to then roll all of that up into this combined connection strength score. And then you can say whether it's weak, familiar, or strong. And then we'll be layering in more and more of these data sources over time to further increase the accuracy. You can think about things from your either from your phone book, from WhatsApp, from Facebook, from Twitter. There's other sources of connections and relationships that exist that are out there. But these are the three that we're starting with.
So inside the platform, if I'm a user, I can imagine I have a particular initiative or challenge that I'm trying to solve for. So I'm trying to hire a co-founder. I'm trying to raise funding. I'm trying to recruit a head of sales, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So there's a starting point at which the user is able to, via category selection, like this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And then there's a way to query the database. It pulls up a short list of people that are scored in a particular way. And you're trying to make that whole process more efficient, correct?
Yeah. So it's not just revealing the individuals' relationships, which kind of can be interesting, like unifying for the first time your connections across your email inbox, from LinkedIn, your previous colleagues, and kind of seeing all that in one place with the connection strength score. That's definitely interesting and valuable, and that's that sort of personal use case that we talked about. But the real value is in seeing other people's networks combined together into this private curated database of your firm's relationships. And the ability for an individual, just one person at a company, to then be able to map everyone else at the firm's work connections within a few minutes is now possible in the platform, so that you can seed your swarm with all of these previous colleagues that all of your team has worked with. And not just your team, you can add your investors, you can add your advisors, anyone who is on the internet, basically. If they're in our database of 800 million profiles, which almost everyone is, then we can look through their work history. We can find those previous colleagues and we can add them in without those users being notified or needing to do anything. So the way it stacks up is we have this foundation of 800 million profiles, and then you layer your relationships on top of that. And then you search through those to identify the most interesting leads for your use case.
And so if you drill down, the real magic of this, there's a network effect to this solution, right? Where the more people that plug in, everybody gets more value out of it, right?
Yep. That's right. And also from a not just within your firm, but also from the meta, every user that joins, increasing the coverage, of all the profiles. Now we have the underlying foundational data set, which is just from our main database that everyone's sort of connecting to, matching to. But with the recent LinkedIn profile changes, what they've done is actually pushed a lot of the profile information behind a login wall, similar to what Twitter has done, which means that the ability to publicly access a lot of that data is now more and more challenging. So, for a lot of players in this market, it will become more and more challenging to have fresh data and to have the most recent data. And we have built a very sophisticated, sort of almost waterfall, type approach machine that can go and gather that fresh data. And as our users bring on their connections, we get a snapshot, of the latest profile information. So we're able to propagate that, to everyone, but whilst keeping all of the individual personal data very private, only in your own swarm. So it's a way that you can, have this nice positive network effect for everyone, but whilst obviously keeping some pretty strict privacy and data controls for that individual.
I want to go back to this interface concept where the user experience needs to be as easy as possible to solve people's existing problems when they look at what the swarm has built underneath to be able to surface these signals or insights or these different lists. So can we talk about where things are today and how you're sort of seeing things over the next 12 to 18 month horizon, and give our listeners an understanding of priorities and goals and targets for making this a more mature solution?
Yeah. So I'd say we're coming out of the first phase or act, which was, think about it as a kind of manual way of mapping your network and identifying leads. So historically, for users on the platform, they have had to invite every user, who then signs up and adds their LinkedIn connections, connects their email inbox, and adds their work overlap connections. And then they search through the database to find leads, and then they will manually send out intro requests to those relationship holders to engage those leads. So each step along the way is implemented, by the user, and it's been a fairly manual, process with obviously, a bit of friction to get all those users' networks on. What we're in the transition of moving towards is this automated, kind of like talking the idea of sort of calling it the AI co-pilot. It is a bit overused, but I think it helps you to visualize it a little bit more. Where you have this co-pilot that can go off and map all of the company's relationships in the background without the users needing to do anything. So you can imagine, as a company, you sign up. This will be actually the new onboarding, of the next few weeks that we'll be pushing out. You sign up as a new company. We can see all of the people that are connected to your company LinkedIn account, and these are all your employees, maybe some investors. And we can then add all of their work overlap connections in the background. We can then see on Crunchbase the investors that your firm has and add in all of those profiles to your network as well. And then we can calculate the connection strength score for everybody. You would then basically tell the system what you're trying to do, right? Maybe your sales, here's our ideal customer persona of our target customers. Maybe if you're recruiting, here's the qualification criteria of the candidates that we're going after. If you're fundraising, here's the type of investors and the sectors and stage that they typically invest at. And the system will then auto match from your network to your target profiles, and will start suggesting, kind of drip feeding you these suggestions for you to review and take action on. And then how you engage those leads will be either pushed out to your existing stack. So we have a CRM integration that's going live now, Affinity integration, as well as ATS integrations coming up, and as well as a direct API into our database, where certain companies may choose to not even use the front end, where they can actually map their network and then push it into a separate tool with just the click of a button, right? And then they have all the relationship data that then can pipe into whatever systems they're using, just via the API. So how you engage those leads will be very diversified. There'll be lots of different plays, but these are the different things that we're sort of like figuring out in real time. So in 6 to 12 months from now, I think that will be a lot more established and robust. But this concept of this AI co-pilot that has 3 legs of mapping, identifying, and engaging, and it will be automating as much as, if not all of, the activities that are involved, and the human can then focus on more higher leverage tasks like reviewing and establishing the best engagement strategy and actually talking to the leads and things like that.
I want to go one layer deeper on the sort of unfounded fears that people come to you with when you approach them about adopting this solution as a change management process. What have you learned that people have that are irrational fears in their mind about what this is or what this means or what this will mean to their existing workflow, that we can help them understand are not rational and are nothing to fear?
Yeah. So definitely, I think the number one is like, this feels like too much work or too much friction to ask people to go through this process of connecting their networks and signing up for this new tool. That's probably the biggest one, which is they look at their company and maybe there's like 100 or 200 potential networks that they want to add, but they don't want to make that request of everyone. They don't want to be herding cats, following up with people and chasing them. So the big unlock there is that we can now do this programmatically in the background for the majority of the connections. For those users who you still want to add their LinkedIn and their LinkedIn, you can actually do that in the background without having them to sign up. There's a few workarounds. Our team can also help with that, but at a very high level, the system now does a lot of that heavy lifting for you. The second one is around privacy concerns. People say, I don't want to hand over my data to this, this platform that is relatively new. And the most sort of common response to that is, for LinkedIn data in particular, it's already public. If I'm connected with you, I can see all of these connections, and what you're doing is really taking ownership of your data as a user. What we do is actually send LinkedIn this GDPR data request to get a copy of your data, right? So you're owning your data for the first time. You're doing the same thing with your email calendar, and then the work overlaps is something that you didn't have before. It wasn't previously mapped on the internet. So we are producing that proprietary data for you. So when people kind of think about that and understand that, makes sense. And then also the fact that your swarm is your own private curated database, and it's only people that you invite to join can see the data that's inside that, right? It's not viewable or accessible to anyone else, not even to our team. So that's the major concerns. I think the question of like, why hasn't this been done before is definitely a big question. But again, like, why are these dead bodies in the water? And I alluded to some of this before, but just to double click on it, the depth of the data So the previous attempts maybe just had the person's current title in the company, but you need really the full work history to produce these work overlap connections, to be able to see all the relationships that someone's had in the previous times that someone's at a company, to unlock a lot of these use cases. The freshness of the data, if it's stale, if it's sitting in some system that's not living and breathing, then it's going to go out of date very quickly. And the narrowness of the use case. So I've seen a few of these pop up. Either it's like network mapping just for sales, or just for recruiting, or just for investors. And I think to build this this new category, you need a platform that can sit across the different use cases of a firm and be able to propagate the network that you've mapped for these different use cases. And then it sort of makes financial sense, and the ROI makes a lot more sense when different departments within the same company can use it, and then can become more of that critical painkiller must-have tool that doesn't then just get shut off when the recruiting team tightens their budgets during a downturn.
So as a prospective user out there listening to this, thinking about like, oh, I'm curious to check it out, what can you talk about broadly? What is sort of the easy entry point? You create an account, you log in, you add your data through a click or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we recommend starting off with, these very simple first steps to see value quickly. What can we speak to there just to help people really understand how easy it is to realize a return on their time, let alone their money, to start adopting this new kind of paradigm?
So we're adopting a product-led motion, which means that you don't have to talk to a salesperson to get access to it. We're trying to let the product speak for itself. So you get access to the full premium version for the first month, and you can push it to the limits. And we definitely encourage you to do that. And when you first join, it should take you under a minute or two to log in and connect your accounts. And then once you have your connections in there, you should then add in other people's networks that are either at the firm, friends of yours that are close enough that you could go to them with an intro request. And that's usually a good sort of next step, which will take another couple of minutes. Add in 10, 20, 50 other people's networks. And then once you've got your networks mapped and in there, then depending on the use case, this is where you're sort of adjusting a little bit. But if it's for sales, look at your current target accounts and go to the company page and look at your connectivity into that target account and see in your network, do you have any warm intro parts? If it's an in-pipeline deal, do you have any influence that maybe you could multi-thread some conversations and try and help to push that deal through to close? If you don't have a list of target accounts, just plug in your ideal customer persona into the filters, and you can search by profiles level filters like title and connection strength and current company, things like that. But you can also search by company level filters, so company size, company industry, and then you can see maybe there's some net new target accounts that you hadn't thought of that surface that you have actually really strong relationships with. That's going to be very low-hanging fruit that you should try and leverage immediately. For recruiting, similar, you can come in, plug in your filters, and then look at some of the top candidates that you're connected to, and then go to those relationship holders and ping them and say, hey, so you're connected, used to work with this amazing data scientist. What do you think of them? Should we consider bringing them on? And then they can be your champion to facilitate that intro. And then similar with obviously fundraising, finding prospective investors and bring them on. So the time to value is minutes. You should be able to view other people's networks and start getting those intros very quickly. I think the challenge I'd say a lot of people have is when they join for the first time and it's just their own connections in there. It is a little bit confusing of to what is the value of this platform when I can just do this on
Hmm.
LinkedIn, where I can kind of see all my connections in LinkedIn already. So what am I doing here? And the the response is that it's the power of all of the other networks that you're bringing in and seeing for the first time all of the company's extended network in one place without all of the noise of LinkedIn secondary connections. So you don't have to wade through all of the noise of LinkedIn to actually, get to the value of what you're trying to do.
Wow. So when we talk about the different sort of features, you talked about premium, and obviously there's a product-led growth motion. So people can see pricing on the website as of today, right? In terms of being
Yep.
able to convert into a paid customer. I'm assuming you've structured the feature sets to accommodate enterprise versus smaller teams.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's a pretty low cost monthly plan. It's all month to month. We don't lock anyone into annual contracts. So you can just try it out for a month for free. And if you like it, if you want to keep using it by yourself, then it's $30 a month right now. And if you want to use it for your company, then it's 300 a month. And that's up to 500
Wow.
seats and includes the CRM and ATS integrations. So that's the kind of the main thing that you can get started with a handful of users internally, $30 each. But then, when you want to have the CRM integrations, when you want to kind of scale it up, that's when we typically advise to go to the premium plan, and then you can if you're an enterprise or if you want access to the API, then that's more of custom, just depending on what you need.
Okay, so let's talk about how people that are listening can be a part of this by going to the website and signing up for a trial experience. What else can people do that are out there to help take this vision and make it a reality faster?
I think understanding the future we're trying to build, and the really biggest help would be to evangelize this future and getting some early wins for yourself that you can kind of hold up as
Mm,
evidence to other folks, in your network, and then share it. Don't just blindly share what we're saying. Like, try it yourself, get the evidence yourself, and then hopefully you can have that real deep conviction that this thing worked because I see the results myself, and then you can share it with other people in your network. Obviously, from a more tactical perspective, like anytime we're posting stuff on Twitter or on LinkedIn, helping to comment and share would obviously be super helpful. But at this stage, we're still early. We're still trying to crack, the exact product that is going to meet the needs of our early customers, and then trying to scale that up into the mainstream. So as much product feedback, trying to break the product and try and find some bugs, and obviously any wish list items that people have. We're just building to what customers are asking us to build.
well, let's summarize the vision one more time from a perspective of you personally as the founder, right? This matters to you, why, right? And then extrapolate that out into why it should matter to everybody listening. And my version of that, just briefly, is we all hear the statement, you are the composite of the 5 people you spend the most time around. You are
Mm.
your network. And to the degree that you try to curate that network and give more than you receive, right? To try to not only keep the equation balanced, but be of service and finding strategic ways of adding value. I see how this, as a larger solution to just that general concept, is such a worthwhile and worthy product to build. That is why I'm so deeply passionate about what this is and what it stands for. But on a deeper level for you, why the hell do you care about this so much? Clearly, it's a way to make money. It's a business. It's fun to be in the leading edge of technology and connecting these things together. But at the core of it, what really wakes you up in the morning and keeps you going, no matter how hard or confusing this journey is or may become?
Yeah, and that's good. It's a good question. I think for me, the experiences I've had working with these early stage startups with investors, with all of these different players in the ecosystem, and then more broadly, like the larger huge enterprise companies that I used to work with as well. That the end of the day, businesses are just groups of people, right? And it's the humans and the relationships that drive anything forward. The tools and the tech that we all use are just that. They're just tools that kind of help us along the way. But what work is, and it's such an integral part of everyone's lives and identities, is working with other people and the relationships that's involved. That is such a huge part of being human. And I think as we enter into this next era of working alongside AI and having AI coworkers and artificial general intelligence, and all these things are going to happen in the decades to come. Having an intentional and deliberate platform to nurture and manage your relationships, and understanding as an individual and as a company how you are building and nurturing those relationships for the long term, not just for transactional kind of one-off campaigns, I think is super critical. And it's just crazy that this doesn't exist. I think LinkedIn kind of started off like this, but then they went in a different direction, and it's now obviously they're monetizing followers and people building audiences, which is great, and I think it's a good platform for that, but it's not really designed for managing your human relationships anymore. So hopefully we can build something that's useful and valuable to a lot of people and a lot of companies, and we're still super early in the journey. So would appreciate any help and support as we go.
Well, let's talk about 5 years looking out and just having some fun with the crystal ball concept. What does life look like in 5 years for David in a business context? And if you're open to sharing on a personal context, what do you aspire and hope for?
Yeah. So when we were doing our last round, one of our investors said, this has the potential to be the combination of LinkedIn and Salesforce, right? And I kind of like that analogy where we can be not just the system of record that companies use for conducting their day-to-day business and managing their customer relationships, but also understanding their broader ecosystem that they sit in and being able to interact with other companies and all the constituents of their ecosystem, all in one place, and with the support of some really intelligent machines and systems behind the scenes. I think that would be an incredible vision to come to life. And working with thousands of happy customers, maybe tens of thousands. On the personal front, obviously seeing the kiddos get older, and 5 years from now, I suppose they'll be starting to go into elementary school, and having that whole experience will be amazing. Really enjoying where I'm living at the moment in the North Bay, in just north of San Francisco, and continuing to keep my roots back to Australia and visiting there as much as I can. So yeah, if I was going to have a crystal ball, I'd say that's where I'm going.
All right. So tell me about what you believe the world needs to understand or embrace that will make the world a better place in the coming years.
To appreciate the limitations of the technology that we're building, in particular the artificial intelligence that we're putting together. It's incredibly useful for scaling up the touch points and the outreach and the research, but it does a really bad job of being a human and building relationships. And I think it would, if you're going to look at like what could go wrong and what would be a bad outcome, would be everyone turning more towards interacting only with other machines and robots, and not having that opportunity to work with other humans. I think that would be absolutely a horrible, society to live in, and a horrible way to work. So focusing on the best parts of work and life, which is the relationships that you have both in and out of the workplace.
What's something that's happened to you in your life or career that few people will believe? Something we haven't talked about.
Well, I mean, I suppose an anecdote of like something that maybe not a lot of people know is I have performed on West End. I was part of the PwC pantomime, which was like a all singing, all dancing, great fun Christmas sort of play for children, and it was Snow White and Cinderella. The ones we did, Cinderella in particular, was great fun. But yeah, ended up performing in front of 1,200 people in this huge West End theatre, and then actually went to the Royal Opera House in Edinburgh as well. So that's a bit of a fun fact that I think a lot of people know about.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about hiring, because my running a executive search firm. I'm curious what your view is on the qualities that you look for in the people that you want to have on your team.
Yeah. So when we're interviewing, we're looking for proven track record of of operating in their domain. At this point in our journey, we are looking for folks who are more senior, who have done this, before. And I think as we grow and as our team expands, we'll have opportunities for more junior folks who are getting started. That's kind of where we're at right now. I think self-starters and people who are proactive and can really take ownership over their work. And just as a startup, there's just so many different hats that you need to wear, and you need to just take control and take ownership without someone needing to tell you every single time. And yeah, the interest in what we're doing as well, I think is important, to have that sort of connection internally to the broader company's why, your personal why.
What advice would you give yourself if you could go back in time and recommend some things go a little differently in terms of the way you approach life? What would you say to your younger self if you could go back in time?
I mean, depends how far back, but I think definitely at certain points is don't take life so seriously. Have fun with it, especially when you're young and before you have real responsibilities, especially before you have kids. I think there's this real like life before kids and life after kids, where you're not the most important person anymore. And I think Naval Ravikant has this great saying, which is, it's you either have to have kids or become a monk, because at some point in your life, you have to start loving something else more than yourself, And I think it's a great, kind of insight into the power of having kids, and I think that a lot of people don't really appreciate, and I just definitely didn't, and how serious and how important I thought I was before I had kids of my own. So it's a very humbling experience.
When are we going to get Naval to join the board? He's one of my favorite humans on planet Earth.
Let's ask him. Let's see who we connect.
We're not only going to tag him, we're going to hope he listens to this whole thing and starts helping to promote you to all of his portfolio companies.
That'd be amazing.
So I want to wrap it up with a 360-degree view of you as a human that I love deeply and respect and feel so proud to be associated with. Give our listeners a bit more context on who you are, what really lights you up and recharges your battery outside of maybe a professional context. What are the sort of 2 to 3 non-obvious, more personal things about you that you're most passionate about outside of work, or any fun rituals or mindfulness practices that make your life more meaningful?
So yeah, really enjoy getting out into nature, camping, and spending as much time as I can, in the wilderness. And I sort of grew up with my dad doing that in Australia, going off on many camping trips. And I think there's just something very restorative and grounding about being in nature amongst the trees or on the beach or in the mountains. A lot of my time, outside of work is obviously spent with my kids, and that's the phase that I'm in right now with 2 young kids. So yeah, I spend a lot of time building towers with magnetiles and watching Bluey and changing diapers. And this morning I was up at 5:30, because the newborn was banging his head against the crib and is learning to roll right now. So putting him back to sleep again. And that's a lot of the stuff that people wouldn't obviously see at work, but hugely rewarding. And it's such an amazing experience seeing these little dudes grow up, and these little people whose personalities are just like fully formed, but just emerge, over the months and years, which is really crazy to see. But so much fun to hang out with, and we're very, very lucky that they're such like sweet, like little fun boys who just like love laughing and singing and having fun.
Are we watching Bluey yet?
There's a great podcast from Hamish Blake, an Australian celebrity, called "How Other Dads Dad," and for any dads or prospective dads out there, would definitely recommend it. And they have this interview with Joe, who's the creator.
Oh, no way.
It's super interesting. Like, he doesn't do any interviews, but I'd recommend listening to it. And he actually kind of talks about how the Bandit and the dad of Bluey is an unrealistic expectation of parents, and how actually in the reality, like, he's too involved, that he should let the kids be in their own world, of the social dramatic play, and not be so involved all the time, because it's actually not as good for kids to be so involved, which is kind of funny to kind of hear that from him. But it's like, that's obviously makes pretty crap TV. Wasn't as interesting.
Oh, that's so funny. My kids come to me and they're like, "Why aren't you more like, Bandit?" I'm like, "Well, listen, why don't you be more like Bingo?" It's like, all right.
You'll see that child developmental psychology, that the parents shouldn't be as involved. You should be learned to play more independently with other kids. Anyway, it's pretty funny. Yeah.
To really put a cap on this, I'd like to end on talking about the future and why you're excited about the future.
I think going back to what I was saying before, where the only constant is change, right? And we're in this, as Azim is called, the exponential era, where for the first time in the history of humans, we're living through this crazy pace of technological advancement and innovation. And the things that we're already seeing, but will see in our lifetimes, are kind of mind-blowing. Like, from potentially, having this artificial intelligence that could be more intelligent than humans, to advances in medicine, and maybe having nanotechnology that can go through our systems and repair blood cells to, all of the amazing developments that we're making to help to cure some of these huge diseases and other things. And I think the groundswell of all of this technology and innovation, for me, starts in the smallest place, which is the startup, right? And that's where this innovation technology kind of first is developed and then commercialized and kind of brought to market. So what I'm really focused on is helping as many of those startups succeed. And 9 out of 10 fail. So if we can increase that by 1 or 2, that's going to be a huge unlock. But then zooming out again, like the broader ecosystem, how companies are built, how capital gets allocated, how VCs work. There's more and more interest in money pouring into VC and into startups, and the ability to navigate all of that in this kind of future and in this new world requires just, I think, a different playbook, a different way of operating. So I'm really excited about kind of helping to design that and architect it and figure out how this all works. And I think there's, unfortunately, also there's a lot of negative aspects, a lot of things happening in the world, and a lot of issues and problems that humanity is facing. And some very existential threats as well, obviously, with climate change and with the potential for another war and all these different geopolitical things that are happening. And it can be challenging to keep a smile and to be optimistic. But I think what's the alternative is you are pessimistic all day and you don't think anything's going to work. I think you've got to be positive and you've got to be relentlessly optimistic that we can build a better future together. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I hope as many people will join me for the ride.
Well, I feel like we're birds of a feather for sure. And you really epitomize why I wanted to start this podcast, not only to deepen the relationships within my existing network, but to share stories and talk to people that are solving important problems that take a humanitarian approach to it and leveraging technology. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate you coming on the show so much. So that's my concluding thoughts. Anything from your side?
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks again, Kraig. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to the next decade together and more.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Bearhug Experience. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please give us a like, click, follow, or subscribe. We appreciate you taking a moment to give us a quick rating and a written review so we can continue to expand our reach and inspire the next generation of leaders to help make this world a better place. You can also contribute to the conversation around this specific episode by using the comments section of whatever platform you're on. And last but not least, if you have direct feedback, a question, or a guest you'd like to suggest that we have on the show, please shoot us an email at podcast@bearhugrecruiting.com or visit bearhugrecruiting.com/podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on another episode of the Bearhug Experience.
What